Get back! Move now! The shout echoed through the mall corridor. The crowd panicked as a man with a gun burst into the children's play area. A little girl stood frozen, crying under the Christmas lights, legs shaking. A single dad dropped his bags and ran toward the girl about to be shot. "No, don't hurt her," he screamed. The gunshot cracked. He spun to shield the child. The bullet tore through his shoulder, but she was safe. An elegant woman rushed forward. "Emma, my baby!" Then she saw the bleeding man on the floor. That moment changed both families forever. Daniel Meyer was 35 years old, a single dad who worked as an electrician and plumber, fixing pipes and wiring in apartment buildings across the city. He was quiet, deeply reserved, and always put his son first above everything else in his life. His son, Oliver, called Ollie by everyone who knew him, was 6 years old. He was shy and anxious around strangers, but incredibly affectionate and sensitive with people he trusted. The woman at the center of everything, Evelyn Grant, 32 years old, a young CEO of a tech startup and single mother to little Emma. She carried enormous pressure on her shoulders and always forced herself to appear strong and in control, even when breaking inside. Daniel had taken Ollie to the upscale Riverside Mall for Christmas shopping that cold December evening. It was the only real gift he could afford to give his son this year. Just a simple day out together, looking at decorations and maybe getting hot chocolate. Ollie wanted desperately to take a picture with the enormous Christmas tree in the center atrium. So they walked through the crowded children's play area on their way there. The mall was packed with holiday shoppers. Music played overhead. Families laughed and took photos. Everything felt safe and normal. Suddenly there were screams that cut through the cheerful noise like a knife. A man waving a gun ran into the open play space, his eyes wild and unfocused, shouting incoherently about something nobody could understand. Daniel's heart stopped completely. Time seemed to slow down. He saw a little girl, maybe 4 years old, standing alone near the glowing Christmas decorations. Her face was white as paper. She was frozen in absolute terror, unable to move or scream. The father's instinct surged up from somewhere deep inside him, something primal and unstoppable. Without thinking, without any hesitation or calculation, he threw down his shopping bags, grabbed the little girl around the waist, and turned his back to the gunman just as the weapon fired. The bullet slammed into Daniel's right shoulder like a hammer blow. Unimaginable pain exploded through his entire body. Blood splattered across Ollie's shocked face. Evelyn had been at a boutique nearby when she heard the first screams. She ran forward from where she'd been looking at clothes, her heart in her throat. She grabbed Emma from Daniel's protective arms and sobbed hysterically, completely overwhelmed. She was in complete shock when she saw Daniel collapsed on the cold tile floor, still trying to cover her daughter with his bleeding body. Security forces and police rushed in within seconds and subdued the attacker, who was clearly having some kind of mental breakdown. Before Daniel passed out from severe blood loss and shock, he looked up at Evelyn with hazy, unfocused eyes. His voice was weak. "The girl, is she okay? Tell me she's okay." Evelyn's throat was so tight she could barely speak. She could barely breathe. "She's okay. She's completely safe. Because of you." The ambulance arrived with sirens blaring. Paramedics quickly loaded Daniel onto a stretcher and started emergency treatment. Ollie panicked and ran after them, crying and screaming desperately for his dad, terrified he would never see him again. Evelyn watched the ragged, bleeding father and traumatized son with eyes that softened for the first time in many years. She saw something real in that moment, something pure and selfless she'd forgotten existed. As they wheeled Daniel toward the ambulance, Ollie pressed something into his father's pale hand. It was a crumpled piece of paper with a crayon drawing. At the top, it said in shaky letters, "Dad is my hero." Evelyn saw this small, heartbreaking gesture. She stood there in complete silence for a very long time, just holding Emma tight and staring at the blood on the floor where a total stranger had thrown himself in front of a bullet to save her daughter's life. Daniel woke up slowly in a private hospital room. Everything hurt. His right shoulder was heavily bandaged and throbbing with deep, persistent pain that made him nauseous. Beside his bed, sitting quietly in expensive chairs, were Evelyn and Emma. This was completely unexpected. He'd assumed they would have gone home, back to their normal lives. Evelyn looked uncomfortable and uncertain, like she didn't quite know how to be in this situation. I had to come. I had to thank you properly. If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't acted so quickly, Emma would have... She couldn't finish the sentence. The thought was too terrible. Daniel just smiled gently despite the pain radiating through his body. His voice was hoarse. Any father would have done exactly the same thing. I just happened to be there. Evelyn was genuinely surprised to see Ollie asleep in a chair by the window, still wearing his blood-stained jacket, clutching a paper robot he'd made in school. She walked over carefully and draped a soft blanket over the sleeping boy. Her eyes held the look of a mother who had already lost too much in life and couldn't bear to lose anything more. He's been here all night, the nurse whispered to Evelyn, refused to leave his father. Evelyn's heart broke a little more. She made an offer to Daniel that morning. She wanted to move him and Ollie to a premium private recovery facility that she would pay for entirely, with the best doctors and therapists. Daniel refused immediately and firmly. He didn't want to owe such an enormous debt of gratitude to anyone. He'd always handled things on his own. But Ollie woke up just then. He grabbed his father's hand with both of his small ones and said with absolute seriousness, "Dad, I want Emma to be safe. If you get better faster, you can make sure she's safe." Something in those innocent, worried words changed Daniel's mind completely. At the luxurious recovery center, Emma and Ollie became fast friends almost immediately. They played together, drew pictures, built block towers. Evelyn began to hear real laughter echoing in the hospital room that had been so gloomy and silent before their arrival. One afternoon while the kids played, Daniel told Evelyn about his past. His wife Sarah had died in a terrible car accident 3 years ago. He'd been raising Ollie completely alone ever since that devastating day. He worked multiple exhausting jobs just to survive and keep food on their table and a roof over their heads. Evelyn listened carefully, then opened up in a way she rarely did with anyone. She told him about her wealthy, judgmental family, how they had looked down on her mercilessly for being a single mother, how they said repeatedly that she wasn't worthy of being a CEO because she couldn't even keep a marriage together, how Emma's father had left when he found out Evelyn was pregnant, calling it a career mistake. The two began sharing deep pain and loneliness they'd never spoken about with anyone else. One quiet evening, Emma gave Daniel a bracelet she'd made from colorful plastic beads. "For you, Uncle Daniel, so you get better fast and strong." Evelyn watched this small, tender gesture and felt the distance between them shrinking with each passing day. The nurse came in to check Daniel's vitals and change his bandages. The wound was healing well considering the severity, but he'd need months of physical therapy to regain full use of his arm. "You're lucky," the nurse said matter-of-factly. "Another inch to the left, and it would have severed a major artery. You would have bled out before the ambulance arrived." After she left, Evelyn sat down heavily in the chair beside Daniel's bed. "I keep thinking about that, about how close we came to losing you, about how Emma would have died if you hadn't..." She stopped, composing herself with difficulty. "But it didn't happen," Daniel said gently, reaching over with his good hand. "Emma is fine and healthy. That's the only thing that matters." "You could have died," Evelyn said, her voice cracking with emotion. "You have a son who needs you desperately. Why would you risk absolutely everything for a child you didn't even know?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, thinking carefully about his answer. Because in that single moment, she was just a terrified little girl who needed help urgently. "I couldn't not try. I couldn't live with myself if I hadn't tried." Evelyn looked at him like she was seeing a completely different species of human being. In her world of business and wealth, people carefully calculated risk and reward. They made strategic decisions based on benefit analysis. They didn't just throw themselves in front of bullets for complete strangers. Over the next 2 weeks, Evelyn visited daily without fail. She brought home-cooked food, interesting books, educational toys for the kids. She sat and talked with Daniel about everything and nothing, about life and loss and hope. One afternoon, while the kids were playing happily together in the corner of the room, Evelyn said quietly, "I've built my entire adult life on being strong, on never showing any weakness, on never needing anyone for anything." "And how's that working out?" Daniel asked with gentle understanding. "I'm exhausted," she admitted honestly. "I'm so tired of pretending I can handle everything alone. Of pretending I don't need help or support or connection. Daniel nodded knowingly. Being strong doesn't mean doing everything by yourself. Sometimes real strength means accepting help when it's offered. Evelyn looked at him thoughtfully, really seeing him. When did you get so wise about life? When I became a single parent and realized very quickly that I couldn't be superhuman no matter how hard I tried. They both laughed genuinely. It was the first real, unguarded laugh Evelyn had experienced in many months. At the end of that week, as Daniel was being discharged from the facility, Ollie gave Evelyn something wrapped carefully in a napkin. She opened it delicately. It was a burnt, lopsided cookie. I made it myself to thank you for helping my dad, Ollie said shyly, looking at his feet. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears she couldn't stop. She carefully put the cookie in her coat pocket like it was made of pure gold. I'll treasure this forever, she told Ollie with complete seriousness. The boy beamed with pride. Emma grabbed his hand excitedly. We're best friends forever now, right? Forever and ever, Ollie agreed solemnly. Evelyn looked at Daniel across the room. Something profound and unspoken passed between them in that moment. The press discovered what had happened at the mall shooting. They called Daniel the unknown hero and the selfless father, and ran emotional stories about his incredible bravery on every news channel and website. Evelyn's family, extremely wealthy and politically powerful, found out about her growing connection to the poor handyman and were absolutely furious about the potential scandal. Her mother, Catherine Grant, called her into the massive family estate for an emergency meeting. The tone was hostile from the moment Evelyn walked through the door. You are the CEO of a major company, her mother said coldly. You cannot associate with this kind of person. It looks absolutely terrible for the company image and for our family reputation. This kind of person, Evelyn repeated, her voice dangerously cold. You mean the kind who literally saved your granddaughter's life by throwing himself in front of a bullet? Her father, Robert Grant, stood up from his leather chair. Don't get emotional about this, Evelyn. This is about maintaining proper standards in society. He's nobody, a handyman with no education, no prospects, no family connections worth mentioning. Daniel had come to the estate to drop off some medical paperwork Evelyn had accidentally left at the hospital. He arrived just as the argument was escalating. He overheard the entire cruel conversation from the marble hallway outside the room. He turned to leave quietly, not wanting to cause any more problems for Evelyn and her already complicated family dynamics. But Evelyn had seen his reflection in the window. She walked out immediately and stopped him at the door. Where are you going? I should leave. I'm clearly making things very difficult for you and your family. You saved my daughter's life, Evelyn said loudly, not caring at all who heard her. I will never let anyone diminish or devalue what you did. Never. But the problems kept multiplying. A major shareholder in Evelyn's tech company, a vindictive man named Marcus Rothwell, wanted to use the scandal to force her out as CEO so he could take control. He leaked completely false information to the media, claiming Daniel had a serious criminal record, including assault charges. The fabricated story exploded online and went viral within hours. Daniel was called in for aggressive questioning by company security. Ollie was absolutely terrified and clung to his father, refusing to let go. Evelyn walked into the interrogation room like a force of nature. Her expression was ice cold and lethal. She'd never looked more powerful or more dangerous. Anyone who touches this man, she said with perfect clarity, is touching my daughter, and I promise you, I will absolutely destroy you. She presented overwhelming evidence proving Daniel's record was completely clean. Then she systematically exposed the shareholders who had fabricated and distributed the false, defamatory information. An emergency shareholder meeting was called for the next morning. The tension in the glass-walled boardroom was explosive and suffocating. Marcus Rothwell stood up, confident and smug. He made his ultimatum clearly. You need to choose right now, Miss Grant. Your career in this company you've built, or this nobody who means nothing. Daniel stood up from where he'd been sitting quietly in the back of the room. I don't want her to lose everything because of me. Evelyn, you should choose your company. Choose your future. Evelyn walked slowly over to him. She looked directly into his eyes with an intensity that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. My world, she said clearly so everyone could hear, has never been safer, never been more real, never been more meaningful than when you were in it. She turned back to face the hostile shareholders. I'm terminating our partnership with Rothwell Industries, effective immediately. Security will escort Mr. Rothwell from the building. The room erupted in chaos. People shouted. This decision could potentially cost her control of the entire company she'd spent years building from nothing. You're making the biggest mistake of your career, Marcus warned, his face red with rage. The mistake, Evelyn said coldly, was ever working with people who value profit and power over basic human decency in human life. Several younger board members stood up in vocal support of Evelyn. They'd been waiting for years for someone to finally stand up to the old guard and their corrupt practices. The major shareholders left angrily, making legal threats and promises of revenge. But Evelyn stood absolutely firm, unbending. Daniel finally understood fully what she'd just done. She'd chosen him over everything. She'd chosen real love and real values over wealth and status. After the dramatic meeting ended, they stood alone in her corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. You didn't have to do that, Daniel said quietly, still processing everything. You could have just let me go, protected yourself. Yes, I absolutely did have to do it, because you taught me something critically important. What's that? That the only things genuinely worth having in this life are the things we're willing to fight for. The things that matter more than money or status or what other people think. Daniel pulled her close. I never wanted to complicate your life like this. You didn't complicate it, Evelyn said, leaning into him. You saved it. You saved Emma and you saved me from becoming someone I never wanted to be. Evelyn immediately restructured the entire company's security systems to ensure Emma would never be in any danger again. She hired the absolute best security consultants money could buy, installed panic buttons throughout her buildings, created comprehensive safety protocols for all employees. She offered Daniel a permanent position as chief child safety consultant for the corporation and all its subsidiaries. The salary was substantial and generous, enough for him and Ollie to live comfortably without the constant grinding financial stress that had defined their lives. At first, Daniel refused the offer flatly. I'm not qualified for that kind of important position. I'm just a regular guy who fixes pipes and wiring. I don't have a degree or training. But Ollie whispered to him earnestly that night as Daniel tucked him into bed, Dad, you could help protect lots and lots of kids like Emma. You'd be really, really good at it because you understand what's dangerous. Daniel thought about it carefully for several days and finally accepted the position with gratitude. The two families began spending significant time together, becoming deeply intertwined, cooking elaborate meals on weekends, watching movies curled up together on the couch, taking the kids on picnics in the park, visiting museums and zoos. Emma hugged Daniel tightly every single time she saw him walk through the door. She'd started calling him Uncle Daniel without anyone suggesting it, and it made his heart swell every time. Evelyn slowly realized something profound and life-changing. Daniel hadn't just saved Emma's physical life that terrifying day in the mall. He'd also somehow healed something deeply broken inside Evelyn herself, something she'd thought was permanently damaged. One bright sunny afternoon, all four of them were painting the kids' new shared playroom together. Music played from a speaker. Everyone laughed freely. It felt completely natural, like a real family had always been. Ollie asked with complete childhood innocence, Miss Evelyn, do you plan to live with us forever and ever? Daniel nearly choked on the water he was drinking. Evelyn's face turned bright red with embarrassment, but she smiled warmly and genuinely. If your dad would let me, I'd like that very much. I'd like that more than anything. Daniel looked at the wall they'd just painted together. Emma and Ollie had spontaneously drawn two adult figures holding hands, surrounded by hearts and stars. His own heart swelled with emotion he'd thought was permanently dead and buried. That calm evening, after both exhausted kids were finally asleep in their beds, Evelyn and Daniel sat together on the back porch under the emerging stars. You changed my family in ways I can't even fully express, Evelyn said softly, her voice full of raw emotion. And you fundamentally changed who I am as a person, how I see the world. Daniel took her hand gently in his. You changed my entire life too. You showed me things I'd forgotten were possible. What did I show you? You showed me that accepting help doesn't make me weak or less of a father. That letting people in doesn't mean I'm failing at life. It means I'm finally being human and honest. Evelyn leaned her head on a strong shoulder, feeling genuinely safe for the first time in many years. We've both been so terribly afraid of needing anyone, of being vulnerable. Maybe we don't have to be afraid anymore, Daniel whispered into the darkness. They sat in comfortable, peaceful silence, watching the stars slowly appear one by one. Over the following weeks and months, they became truly inseparable as families and as people. Daniel fixed broken things around Evelyn's large house. Evelyn helped Ollie patiently with his increasingly difficult homework. The kids became like actual siblings, inseparable and devoted to each other. One warm Saturday afternoon at the park, watching Emma and Ollie play tag energetically together, Evelyn said quietly, "I honestly never thought I'd have this." Have what exactly? A real family, not based on money or status or social obligation or family pressure, just based on genuine love and free choice. Daniel squeezed her hand affectionately. Me neither. I thought that part of my life was over forever when Sarah died. Maybe, Evelyn said thoughtfully, the very best things come when we finally stop desperately looking for them and just let them happen naturally. Daniel pulled her close. I think you might be right about that. One peaceful weekend morning, several months later, Daniel made breakfast for 3 people he deeply loved: Evelyn, Emma, and Ollie. The kitchen was filled with warmth and the delicious smell of pancakes and fresh coffee brewing. Emma hung a new drawing on the refrigerator door with colorful magnets shaped like animals. It showed 4 people standing together under an enormous red heart with rays of sunshine spreading outward. Evelyn stared at it for a long moment, her hand instinctively going to her chest like something deep inside had been powerfully touched and awakened after years of sleep. Is this your family, sweetheart? She asked Emma carefully, her voice soft and uncertain. Emma nodded enthusiastically, her eyes bright with pure joy. Yes, Dad Daniel, Mom Evelyn, me and Ollie, we're a real family now, right? Daniel stood completely still across the kitchen, hardly breathing, waiting nervously for Evelyn's response to their daughter's innocent but profound declaration. Evelyn looked at all 3 of them carefully and lovingly. At Daniel with his gentle strength and quiet courage, at Ollie with his shy smile and sensitive heart, at Emma with her absolute certainty and pure faith in the goodness of people. Then she whispered with tears streaming down her face, I've been running my whole life from real connection and vulnerability. But here with you 3, I want to stop running. I want to stay forever. Daniel stepped forward and took her trembling hand in both of his strong ones. If you and Emma truly want this, if you want us and choose us, then this house, this life, this family is our home together. Emma and Ollie rushed forward simultaneously and hugged both adults with all their small strength. Joyful laughter and happy tears filled the sunny room with love, and hope. 2 previously broken families had finally become one complete family. And it all started with a single bullet, a moment of pure terror, and a father who didn't think of himself first, but acted on instinct and selfless love. Daniel never considered himself a hero. He just did what any parent would do, what his heart demanded in that critical moment. But to Evelyn and Emma, he was everything. He was safety. He was home. He was family. He was the person who changed everything. And to Ollie, his dad had always been a hero. But now that hero had expanded their small family into something bigger and more beautiful than either of them had dared to dream possible. That afternoon, all 4 of them sat together in the backyard garden. The kids played happily. The adults watched with deep contentment. Do you ever think about that terrible day at the mall? Evelyn asked quietly, not wanting to disturb the peace. Sometimes, Daniel admitted honestly, but not with fear or regret, just with gratitude that I was there at the right moment, that I could help when it mattered most. You did more than help, Evelyn said, squeezing his hand tightly. You gave me back my daughter. You saved her life. And you gave me a second chance at having a real family built on love, not obligation. Daniel smiled warmly at her. You gave me something precious too. What did I give you? You gave me permission to stop being so strong all the time, to admit I need help, to accept love when it's offered freely, to trust again. They sat together peacefully, watching their children play, knowing they'd found something rare and precious and worth protecting forever. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. It was perfect. If you believe heartfelt stories about courage, sacrifice, and family like this deserve to be shared with others, leave a comment and subscribe to Strong Dad Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten.